Need as Dramatic Force in the Plays of David Mamet by Jill So Wilson. www.jillsowilson.com. In the plays of David Mamet, language is hungry. His characters enter the room in pursuit of something immediate and deeply human: a sale, a promotion, a woman, a favor, a second chance, a scrap of dignity. The objective shifts with circumstance, and the social costume shifts with it. The hunger remains. Mamet's dialogue moves with the muscular unpredictability of live negotiation. A sentence begins as charm, sharpens into pressure, turns suddenly toward accusation, then circles back through humor with the speed of a hand reaching for a wallet, a shoulder, a doorknob, a telephone. His characters interrupt one another because thought itself has become physical. They lean forward before they speak. They circle while they listen. They smile while they calculate. They track weakness, leverage, hesitation, and breath with the alertness of gamblers studying a table that has already taken too much. By the time an audience begins hearing rhythm, the body has already made its move. By the time David Mamet emerged as one of the defining dramatists of the late 20th century, his work had already begun generating conversations that extended well beyond the theater. His essays, interviews, screenplays, public arguments, and political evolution invited admiration in some circles and suspicion in others. While productions of Oleanna became flashpoints in university classrooms, rehearsal halls, faculty lounges, and critical journals, with audiences carrying their own ideological frameworks into the theater long before the first actor crossed the stage. Political discourse, however, explains only part of Mamet's enduring cultural force. The deeper architecture of his plays lives in appetite, in fear, in territory, and in the human instinct to secure something essential before someone else takes it. This essay examines need as Mamet's governing dramatic force in Glengarry Glen Ross, American Buffalo, and Oleanna, 3 plays in which language functions simultaneously as currency, intimacy, camouflage, seduction, and weaponry, while the actor's body becomes the first and most truthful site of negotiation. Commerce and the Scent of Desperation, Glengarry Glen Ross. Among Mamet's most enduring achievements, Glengarry Glen Ross remains perhaps his clearest anatomical study of language under economic pressure. From its opening moments, the play establishes a world in which human worth has become inseparable from performance, and performance itself has become inseparable from survival. Coffee cools in paper cups, rain gathers on overcoats, fluorescent light settles over desks, files, telephones, legal pads, and sales charts, whose numbers carry the emotional force of scripture. The office functions as both workplace and proving ground, a space in which conversation carries immediate financial consequence, and every interaction exists inside an invisible hierarchy that is continuously being renegotiated. The salesmen who inhabit this world understand that language moves money, opens doors, alters social temperature, and reshapes the emotional architecture of a room in less than 30 seconds. Their dialogue arrives polished, adaptive, manipulative, intimate, and relentlessly tactical. With each sentence calibrated toward a specific objective, compliment becomes leverage, humor becomes access, vulnerability becomes negotiation, memory becomes currency, even silence acquires market value. No character embodies this collision of commerce and identity more completely than Shelley Levine, whose physical presence carries the residual electricity of a man who remembers what it felt like to enter a room already expected. Levine speaks from memory as much as from circumstance. He remembers clients leaning forward. He remembers handshakes that closed before the paperwork appeared. He remembers the bodily confidence of a salesman whose reputation entered the building several minutes before he did. Mamet allows these memories to surface through repetition, interruption, unfinished thoughts, strategic warmth, and sudden flashes of wounded pride, creating a character whose objective extends far beyond a list of leads. Levine pursues relevance, dignity, professional memory, and the increasingly fragile belief that charisma, properly deployed, still possesses market value. Ricky Roma enters the play from a different center of gravity. Where Levine reaches backward toward remembered authority, Roma operates through immediate psychological precision, reading posture, hesitation, eye contact, and social insecurity with the ease of someone who understands that salesmanship begins long before the contract appears. His now famous conversation with Link unfolds with the patience of a predator who understands that trust grows more quickly when the target believes the conversation was never a transaction to begin with. Roma speaks about chance, mortality, loneliness, and pleasure with philosophical ease. Yet each observation functions inside a carefully constructed pursuit. The intimacy feels spontaneous. The objective remains exact. Mamet's brilliance in Glengarry Glen Ross lies in his understanding that commerce rarely operates as commerce alone. Inside these men, professional ambition, masculine identity, sexual confidence, aging, status, shame, and economic fear circulate through the same nervous system, often emerging through the same sentence. A request for leads carries the emotional weight of a plea for relevance. A successful close restores far more than commission. A failed month threatens far more than income. By embedding economic pressure directly into breath, rhythm, posture, and interruption, Mamet transforms the sales office into something far more intimate than a workplace. It becomes a laboratory of human appetite, where language carries the scent of desperation long before anyone names the price. Brotherhood, scarcity, and emotional territory. American Buffalo. If Glengarry Glen Ross locates need inside the fluorescent urgency of late capitalist commerce, American Buffalo brings that same appetite into a far more intimate arena, where friendship, loyalty, masculinity, and emotional inheritance occupy the same physical space and frequently speak through the same body. The setting itself establishes the terms of the play's emotional architecture. Dust gathers across forgotten objects. Afternoon light falls unevenly through shop windows that have witnessed better decades. Shelves sag beneath merchandise that no longer remembers its original purpose, while coins, cards, tools, and scraps of Americana sit quietly waiting for someone to assign them value again. The junk shop functions as both marketplace and memory palace, a room in which objects outlive owners and scarcity shapes the emotional vocabulary of everyone inside it. Donnie occupies this world with the grounded physicality of a man who has spent years negotiating disappointment through routine. He pours coffee, straightens merchandise, studies customers, and watches younger men move through his space with ambitions that frequently exceed their discipline. His objectives appear practical, even modest: a profitable score, a successful transaction, a quiet day. Yet Mamet gradually reveals a deeper pursuit operating beneath those immediate circumstances. Donnie wants influence. He wants continuity. He wants the emotional authority of being needed by someone who still has time to become something. That emotional investment finds its clearest expression in Bob, whose presence introduces an entirely different nervous system into the room. Bob listens before he speaks. He waits. He absorbs. He studies the older men with the cautious attention of someone learning not only how to survive, but how masculinity performs itself under pressure. His physical stillness becomes dramatically significant because everyone around him fills silence with projection. Donnie sees potential. Teach sees vulnerability. The audience sees a young man standing inside multiple, competing definitions of worth. Teach, by contrast, enters the play carrying volatility in his musculature. His language moves faster than his reasoning. His interruptions arrive before another speaker has fully completed a thought. His accusations sharpen in real time, gathering force through suspicion, wounded pride, improvisation, and the constant recalibration of status. Mamet writes Teach with extraordinary behavioral precision because Teach thinks through movement. He thinks while pacing. He thinks while pointing. He thinks while closing the distance. He thinks while interrupting. His objectives reorganize themselves in the space of a single breath, and each shift becomes immediately visible in the body before it fully announces itself in language. What gives American Buffalo its enduring emotional force is Mamet's understanding that masculine intimacy often arrives through competition, through ritual, through coded loyalty, through jokes that land half a beat too hard, through criticism offered in the language of mentorship, through silence that asks for recognition without ever requesting it directly. These men exchange information, money, strategy, and suspicion. Yet beneath every transaction lives a deeper negotiation over belonging itself. Who gets invited into the plan? Who gets trusted with the details? Who gets left outside the circle? Who gets called family? Who gets treated as expendable? By embedding those questions inside ordinary conversation, interrupted rhythms, shifting alliances, and bodies shaped by scarcity, Mamet transforms a failed heist into something far more intimate than criminal ambition. American Buffalo becomes a study in emotional territory, where brotherhood carries the same urgency as profit, and where exclusion lands with the force of physical injury. Language, power, and the elasticity of interpretation. Oleanna. Few contemporary American plays continue generating the sustained cultural intensity of Oleanna, and much of that intensity grows from the precision with which Mamet transforms ordinary academic conversation into a struggle over authority, language, memory, and ownership. The setting appears deceptively familiar: a university office, books lining the shelves, papers stacked across a desk, a telephone that interrupts at inconvenient moments. The architecture suggests mentorship, intellectual exchange, professional guidance, and the quiet rituals of institutional life. Mamet understands how quickly such spaces acquire emotional charge once language begins carrying multiple objectives at once. John occupies the office with the physical ease of a man whose professional life has trained him to treat intellectual space as an extension of his own body. He leans back while he explains. He interrupts himself while thinking aloud. He circles an idea before landing on it. He speaks with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his unfinished thoughts granted the benefit of time, context, and charitable interpretation. His office reflects that ease. Books spill outward. Papers remain unfinished. Conversations overlap. Telephones ring. Appointments shift. His environment carries the accumulated habits of someone who expects the room to hold while he continues thinking. Carol enters carrying an entirely different physical vocabulary. Her questions arrive with urgency. Her posture carries tension. Her silences gather weight before they release into speech. She listens with the concentration of someone attempting to decode not only the language being spoken, but also the institutional rules embedded inside that language. Her confusion carries intellectual frustration, academic pressure, economic vulnerability, and the increasingly familiar sensation of standing inside systems whose expectations remain partially obscured. What gives Oleanna its enduring dramatic force is Mamet's understanding that language often serves multiple functions simultaneously, particularly inside relationships shaped by unequal power. A sentence may seek clarity while establishing authority. A question may ask for guidance while testing boundaries. An apology may carry warmth, self-protection, vulnerability, and strategic repositioning within the same breath. Meaning continues shifting because each speaker hears language through a different history, a different social education, and a different relationship to institutional power. Mamet builds this dramatic architecture with extraordinary restraint. Conversations repeat with subtle variation. Words return carrying altered emotional weight. Gestures once perceived as casual acquire sharper significance through memory, repetition, and recontextualization. A phrase spoken in passing returns later with the force of evidence. A moment of perceived generosity returns carrying accusation. A private conversation gathers public consequence. Through this continual reshaping of language, Mamet creates a theatrical environment in which interpretation itself becomes contested territory. For the actor, Oleanna demands extraordinary specificity because the emotional temperature of each scene depends less on overt conflict than on the microscopic shifts occurring beneath ordinary conversation. A delayed response, a redirected glance, a hand resting too long on the desk, a chair moved a few inches closer, a laugh arriving in the wrong place, a breath held half a second too long. These physical choices shape the audience's interpretation as powerfully as the text itself. Mamet places enormous trust in the actor's ability to understand that authority often speaks through behavior before it ever announces itself in language. By the final moments of Oleanna, the office has ceased functioning as a place of mentorship or intellectual exchange. It has become a contested emotional landscape in which memory, interpretation, language, and physical presence all carry evidentiary weight. In Mamet's hands, communication itself becomes the site of struggle, and every word enters the room already negotiating for territory. Performing Mamet through the work of Sanford Meisner. To approach David Mamet through the work of Sanford Meisner is to recognize that Mamet's dialogue acquires its force long before it acquires its rhythm. Audiences frequently speak of Mamet's language as musical, rapid, percussive, and unmistakably American, while actors encountering his work for the first time often arrive carrying an understandable fascination with interruption, pace, profanity, and verbal precision. Meisner directs attention somewhere older and far more foundational. He directs the actor toward behavior, toward contact, toward the living exchange that exists between two people whose bodies have already begun negotiating long before the first line reaches the air. Meisner's oft-quoted definition of acting as, quote, the ability to live truthfully under imaginary circumstances, end quote, has entered the vocabulary of actor training with such frequency that its radical specificity can occasionally fade into familiarity. In practice, however, Meisner's technique demands something extraordinarily concrete. It asks the actor to place full attention on the other person, to receive behavior without commentary, to allow that behavior to produce a genuine physiological response, and to permit the next action to emerge from that response rather than from intellectual planning. Attention moves outward, impulse moves inward, behavior emerges through contact. Few playwrights reward that discipline more fully than Mamet. In a Mamet scene, the actor who arrives with predetermined line readings, carefully shaped inflections, or a rhythmic plan assembled during table work often discovers that the scene begins sounding polished long before it begins sounding alive. Mamet's characters interrupt one another because the partner has changed them mid-thought. A phrase lands differently than expected. A joke conceals a threat. A compliment carries condescension. Silence creates opportunity. A glance across the room alters the emotional temperature before language has time to explain why. Mamet's interruptions, therefore, carry dramatic force only when they emerge from genuine behavioral shifts occurring in real time. This is where Meisner's repetition work becomes particularly useful. In repetition, two actors observe one another with ruthless specificity, naming behavior as it appears, allowing each shift in tone, posture, breath, eye contact, rhythm, or emotional pressure to reshape the exchange, moment by moment. You're smiling. I'm smiling. I'm smiling? You're smiling because you don't trust me. The language remains deceptively simple, while the emotional life underneath continues evolving through genuine contact. The exercise trains the actor to stop manufacturing behavior and start receiving it. Mamet's scenes demand precisely that same muscular responsiveness. When Ricky Roma studies a client across the restaurant table in Glengarry Glen Ross, the actor's work begins long before the first philosophical observation leaves his mouth. He studies breath. He studies posture. He studies hesitation. He notices where the client's shoulders collapse, where loneliness becomes visible for half a second before social conditioning covers it again. Roma's next sentence grows from what he has received, not from what he rehearsed. When Teach circles Donnie in American Buffalo, suspicion enters the scene through physical proximity before accusation ever enters language. The actor playing Teach feels a delayed response, catches an incomplete answer, notices a withheld glance, closes distance, raises vocal pressure, changes tactic, circles again. The body receives information. The objective reorganizes itself. The next line arrives carrying fresh urgency because the partner has changed the actor in real time. When Carol listens to John in Oleanna, silence becomes active behavior. Her stillness gathers information. Her eyes track unfinished thoughts. Her breath shortens as confusion sharpens into recognition. A phrase that initially lands as an explanation returns several beats later, carrying entirely different emotional significance because the actor has remained behaviorally available to every shift occurring in the room. Meisner referred to this process as the pinch and the ouch. One actor initiates behavior. The partner receives it fully. The response emerges through genuine impact. The simplicity of the language often conceals the sophistication of the exchange, because the technique trains the actor to trust that truthful behavior, fully received, will generate its own dramatic architecture. Mamet's writing thrives inside that architecture. His scenes pulse with tactical shifts, emotional rehearsals, interrupted objectives, and sudden bursts of language because his characters continue receiving one another with extraordinary vigilance. For the actor, this changes the question entirely. The work no longer begins with, "How should this line sound?" The work begins with, "What just happened to me?" Then, "What do I want now?" Then, "What action will move my partner?" Inside Mamet's world, that sequence repeats hundreds of times in a single scene. A glance lands, breath shifts, territory changes, the body receives it, language follows. Conclusion. Across Glengarry Glen Ross, American Buffalo, and Oleanna, David Mamet returns again and again to rooms where human beings arrive already negotiating for something essential. Money carries the weight of dignity. Friendship carries the weight of belonging. Conversation carries the weight of territory. A sales office, a junk shop, and a university office. Each environment appears culturally distinct, yet each becomes the site of the same profoundly human exchange, where appetite sharpens language, pressure reorganizes behavior, and ordinary conversation acquires the emotional force of combat. For the actor, Mamet's work offers a demanding and unusually precise laboratory for behavioral truth. Through the discipline of Sanford Meisner, the partner becomes the primary source of impulse, disruption, recalibration, and tactical change. Objective, circumstance, and action acquire muscular specificity. Together, these approaches illuminate what Mamet understood from the beginning. Rhythm grows from pursuit, language grows from contact, and dramatic tension grows from bodies fully committed to an immediate objective. This is what gives Mamet's theater its enduring electricity. The interruption lands because something has shifted. The silence gathers weight because someone is thinking faster than language can keep pace. The accusation cuts because vulnerability entered the room several beats earlier and never fully left. In David Mamet's world, the line carries the sound. Need carries the scene. For more theater essays, literary criticism, and original writing by Jill So Wilson, visit jillsowilson.com.